Hello, dear listener. Before we begin tonight's gentle journey into the world of history, I invite you to take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell. By doing so, you'll join us for many more calm, soothing tales from the past, perfect companions for your quiet evenings or moments of rest. Now, let us slowly drift back in time to the 18th century, a world where doing nothing was not only appreciated, but truly considered an art. In the soft glow of candlelight, as shadows flickered across the walls of grand European townhouses, a very different rhythm of life unfolded. The 18th century, often remembered for its powdered wigs, ornate furniture, and grand ballrooms, held a quieter, more contemplative side, one where the art of leisure was cultivated, cherished, and pursued with deliberate intention. To us today, so caught up in constant motion and busy schedules, this might seem almost alien. Yet, it was a world where doing nothing was, paradoxically, a pursuit requiring both discipline and sophistication. Imagine walking along a cobblestone street in Paris or London, the morning mist curling round your feet. Outside, merchants call softly to each other as they arrange their wares, but inside the homes of the well-to-do, a different kind of ritual begins. Ladies in silk gowns and gentlemen in waistcoats sit by windows with steaming cups of tea or chocolate, reading, writing, or simply staring into space. This was not laziness. It was a cultivated pause, a conscious retreat from the demands of society, politics, and work. The idle hours were carefully structured to encourage reflection, conversation, and the gentle appreciation of beauty in daily life. Books, for instance, were more than mere entertainment. They were companions for the mind, instruments for meditation, and sometimes tools for subtle social performance. A wealthy woman might spend an hour tracing her eyes over passages of poetry, turning phrases slowly, savoring the rhythm of the words. In doing so, she demonstrated both refinement and leisure, a visible sign to others that her time was her own to command. Men, similarly, might study philosophical treatises or maps of faraway lands, not necessarily for practical application, but for the satisfaction of curiosity and intellect. Here, doing nothing was interwoven with quiet mental activity. The mind rested even as it wandered. Yet leisure was not confined to books alone. Music played a central role. Harpsichords, violins, and flutes offered melodies that floated softly through the corridors of homes. Afternoon concerts, small gatherings of friends and acquaintances, or solitary practice sessions were all considered worthy of time that could have been spent in labor. The music was not meant to impress crowds or achieve public acclaim, but to soothe the spirit. In these moments, time seemed to stretch. The hours became gentle companions rather than relentless masters. The gardens of the 18th century also reflected this philosophy, landscaped with winding paths, ornamental fountains, and flowering shrubs. They were designed for leisurely strolls. Walking through a garden was not merely exercise. It was a form of meditative wandering, a chance to observe the world in miniature and appreciate the fleeting beauty of nature. Aristocrats might pause to watch the reflection of sunlight on a pond, listen to the subtle rustle of leaves, or simply enjoy the quiet presence of their surroundings. These outdoor moments reinforced the concept that true leisure required mindfulness, an attentive engagement with the calm rhythms of life. Tea and conversation were further extensions of this cultivated art. Afternoon gatherings offered the chance to exchange ideas slowly, savor stories, and engage in gentle debate without urgency. The etiquette surrounding such occasions emphasized patience, attentiveness, and the grace of unhurried speech. Interruptions were frowned upon. Silence was embraced as part of the social fabric. In a modern world of constant alerts and messages, the deliberate pacing of these encounters feels almost revolutionary. But perhaps the most profound aspect of this art was its among daily routines. Even chores, when approached mindfully, could become forms of leisure. Folding linens, polishing silverware, or tending to a small collection of flowers could be meditative acts. Rather than rushing through such tasks, the 18th century household often encouraged attention to detail, appreciation for textures, and awareness of rhythm. In this way, leisure was not the absence of action, but a shift in the quality of attention, a reminder that even the mundane could hold calm satisfaction. The philosophy underpinning these practices was simple yet profound. Time, when respected and savored, could elevate the human spirit. Doing nothing in this context was never wasted. It was a form of care for the self, a cultivation of patience, and a celebration of observation. In an age before televisions, smartphones, or social media, the luxury of attentive stillness was one of life's highest offerings. It trained the senses, the mind, and the soul to notice subtleties that often escape us in our frantic modern pace. As evening descended, candlelight softened further, casting elongated shadows across polished wooden floors and delicate wallpaper. Gentle laughter from a nearby gathering might mix with the distant tolling of a church bell, creating a serene soundscape. One could sit, perhaps, with a small sketchbook or journal, tracing thoughts slowly, allowing memories and ideas to drift naturally, even without specific tasks. The mere act of being present in these carefully curated moments constituted a full, meaningful engagement with life. It is fascinating to consider how different this approach is from our contemporary understanding of productivity. Today, rest is often guilt-laden, and moments of idleness feel like failure. Yet, in the 18th century, those who embraced leisure fully were seen as refined, cultured, and even morally aware. They recognized the human need for reflection, the value of gentle curiosity, and the deep satisfaction of simply observing. Leisure was a medium through which intellect and spirit could flourish quietly, away from the clamor of societal demands. In reflecting on this, one might find inspiration for our own modern lives. Even a brief pause, a mindful cup of tea, a slow walk through a nearby garden or park can reconnect us with the same principles cherished centuries ago. The art of doing nothing is not emptiness. It reminds us that slowing down, noticing, and appreciating can restore energy, clarity, and peace of mind. In this sense, the past offers more than quaint anecdotes. It offers lessons in the art of living well, quietly and fully. The afternoons of the 18th century moved with a deliberate, unhurried rhythm. In cities such as Paris and London, the wealthy and the learned found refuge from the bustling streets in carefully curated spaces of calm. Salons, intimate gatherings held in private homes, served as central hubs for this cultivated leisure. Within these rooms, adorned with tapestries, oil paintings, and polished furniture, conversation unfolded slowly, measured not by its speed, but by its refinement and depth. Hosts and hostesses arranged seating to encourage gentle engagement, creating pockets of intimacy where ideas could flow without haste. Tea was poured from silver pots into fine china cups, the clinking sound punctuating pauses in discussion. Topics meandered through philosophy, literature, art, and occasionally the subtle threads of politics. Always with careful moderation, each voice was given space to resonate, each silence permitted to linger, fostering an environment where thought and reflection were as valued as words themselves. Music was inseparable from these afternoons. Harpsichords, violins, and flutes filled the air, complementing the conversation with melodies that were both gentle and expressive. Musicians practiced for hours, often alone, drawing solace and concentration from repetition and harmony. Their music was never rushed. Each note was deliberate, each cadence measured, creating a soft current that carried the mind into contemplation. Guests listened with ease, allowing sound to flow into their consciousness without demanding focus, a gentle accompaniment to the calm of the space. Gardens offered another layer to these leisurely routines, designed with aesthetic principles in mind. Paths meandered among flowering shrubs, groves of trees, small fountains, and reflective ponds. A walk through such gardens was a meditative exercise in motion, a way to engage both body and mind. Walkers might pause to admire the geometry of hedges, the shimmer of sunlight on water, or the subtle fragrance of blooms. These moments were opportunities for quiet observation, turning the simple act of walking into an exercise in attentiveness and mindfulness. Tea and light refreshments were often enjoyed during or after such walks. The act of sipping tea, tasting biscuits, or sampling delicate cakes was approached deliberately, with attention to the sensations of taste, texture, and aroma. Conversation might continue alongside these indulgences, measured in tone and tempo, emphasizing thoughtful exchange rather than hurried commentary. Even the smallest actions were performed with care, reflecting the principle that leisure was as much about quality of experience as about the absence of labor. Reading and correspondence further enriched these quiet afternoons. Letters were written slowly, with careful choice of words and attention to presentation. Ink on paper became a medium for both thought and reflection, each line a deliberate expression of presence and care. Books, too, were companions for contemplation. Poetry, essays, travelogues, and philosophical treatises were explored deliberately, allowing ideas to settle and resonate in the mind. Reading was never rushed. Each sentence was savored, each passage absorbed in measured thought. Household chores, though seemingly mundane, were also approached with a sense of folding linens, polishing silverware, or tending to small flower beds became exercises in mindfulness. The pace of work was slow, emphasizing precision and attention to detail rather than speed. Through this approach, even ordinary tasks could become sources of quiet satisfaction, reinforcing the principle that leisure was not the absence of action, but a change in the quality of engagement. Visitors to the salons, musicians in their practice rooms, walkers in gardens, and readers in sunlit windows all participated in a shared rhythm of calm. Time was not measured by urgency or efficiency, but by attentiveness, reflection, and the gentle unfolding of thought. Doing nothing, in this sense, was a deliberate practice, an opportunity to cultivate presence and refinement, even amidst conversations, music, and activity. The underlying principle was always quiet awareness, observing, appreciating, and moving gently through each moment. As the hours drifted onward, sunlight softened and shadows lengthened. The streets outside might still hum with commerce and movement, but within these curated spaces, the pace was entirely different. Each element, the measured conversation, the soft music, the careful steps along garden paths, the deliberate engagement with letters and books, combined into a unified experience of thoughtful leisure. In this way, afternoons became both restorative and enriching, offering the mind and senses a calm that contrasted sharply with the energy and noise of urban life, even in the private chambers of the aristocracy. This philosophy of unhurried attention prevailed. Windows opened onto gardens, letting in the cool breeze, the scent of flowers, and the soft murmur of nature. Furniture was arranged to invite contemplation. Small tables held books, writing implements, and objects of aesthetic curiosity. Lamps and candles were positioned to offer soft illumination, enhancing rather than distracting from the mood. The architecture of the space itself supported a life of quiet observation, a life in which doing nothing was carefully designed into the fabric of daily existence. Music remained a constant thread through these afternoons. Beyond salons and private practice, small performances were occasionally arranged for intimate audiences. These were not grand spectacles, meant for public acclaim, but personal experiences, meant to soothe and engage. Compositions of the period, often delicate in structure, encouraged reflection and subtle attention. Listeners were invited not to respond loudly or overtly, but to absorb and enjoy quietly, letting the music mingle with the ambient sounds of the household or garden. The sensory environment of these spaces was meticulously considered. The scent of brewed tea, the aroma of baked goods, the subtle perfume of flowers, the sound of birds or water, and the sight of carefully arranged objects all contributed to a rich but unobtrusive tapestry of experience. In this environment, every sense was gently engaged without overstimulation, promoting calm awareness and sustained attention. Evenings approached gradually, marked by the softening of light and the gentle retreat of activity. Yet, the principle of leisurely attention did not end with daylight. Candlelight and lamp illumination continued to support reading, music, and quiet reflection. The flow of hours, whether in afternoon salons, garden walks, or private music practice, exemplified a rhythm of life in which leisure was deliberate, considered, and integrated seamlessly into the day. Through these practices, the inhabitants of the 18th century cultivated both mental and emotional resilience. Their engagement with quiet, measured activity allowed thought, creativity, and reflection to flourish. Doing nothing was never emptiness. It was presence, awareness, and attentive participation in the world at a gentle pace. The afternoons were a training ground for perception, patience, and appreciation, demonstrating that the simplest acts, performed with mindfulness, could offer deep satisfaction. Gardens, salons, music, reading, and careful domestic tasks all worked together to create a life, rhythm that valued observation and calm. Every movement, word, and gesture reinforced the principle that time was precious not in its quantity but in the quality of its experience. The art of leisure required dedication, attention, and, above all, a willingness to slow down, notice, and savor the subtleties of the world. In this quiet rhythm of afternoons, the 18th century revealed a profound truth. Doing nothing, when approached intentionally, was not only restorative but deeply enriching. Presence, mindfulness, and attentive engagement with even the smallest details created a sense of harmony between mind, body, and environment. Each hour spent in measured leisure became a meditation in itself, a practice of refinement that extended beyond immediate pleasure to nurture intellect, aesthetics, and emotional well-being. Even within the structured lives of aristocracy and scholars, these afternoons remained spaces of freedom. They were carefully designed, yet they allowed for spontaneity, quiet reflection, and the gentle unfolding of thought. Walkers might linger longer at a particularly beautiful bloom. Readers might pause over a line of poetry. Musicians might explore variations in a familiar melody. These small choices, made in calm attention, defined the art of leisure. Through it all, the message of these afternoons was clear. Life need not be dominated by constant labor or outward achievement. There was value in stillness, in observation, and in gentle engagement with the world. Music, gardens, literature, and conversation were tools to cultivate this art, teaching that richness of experience came not from speed or accumulation, but from attentive participation in the quiet moments of daily life. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the 18th century household transitioned seamlessly into evening, a time marked not by rush or urgency, but by deliberate, soothing rituals. Candles were carefully lit, their flickering flames casting soft shadows across walls adorned with portraits, tapestries, and gilded frames. The atmosphere was transformed from the bright, open energy of daytime to a calm, intimate space designed to encourage reflection and gentle engagement with the world. Evening routines in these households were meticulously curated. Meals were often lighter than the midday repast, sometimes consisting of simple soups, bread, and cheeses. Yet they were approached with the same care as any other aspect of life. The act of dining became a mindful exercise, emphasizing slow consumption, appreciation of flavors, and quiet conversation among family or select guests. Each movement, from lifting a spoon to pouring wine, was performed with elegance and attentiveness, reinforcing the broader rhythm of measured living. After supper, the home would settle into a state of gentle tranquility. Candles flickered in sconces and on tables, illuminating books, writing materials, and delicate ornaments. Families and individuals might gather in sitting rooms or private studies, each absorbed in quiet pursuits. The act of reading was central to evening life. Literature, philosophy, poetry, and scientific treatises were explored with deliberate care, sentences and passages absorbed fully before moving on. The mind, though active, was engaged in a controlled, contemplative fashion, fostering calm and reflection rather than haste or distraction. Letter writing was another key component of evening rituals. Ink, carefully chosen and prepared, flowed onto crisp paper as correspondences were composed. The process required patience, attention to legibility, and a considered selection of words. Letters were folded and sealed with wax, sent not merely as communication, but as expressions of thoughtfulness and presence. In this practice, the writer exercised both intellect and artistry, transforming ordinary communication into a meditative, intentional act. Music continued to hold prominence in evening life. Harpsichords, clavichords, violins, and flutes provided gentle accompaniment to solitary reading or quiet conversation. Small performances were often arranged for close family or friends, rarely for public acclaim. The music itself was subtle, designed to soothe, inspire, and complement the intimate ambience of candlelit rooms. Notes and harmonies intertwined with the soft sounds of the household, the creak of floorboards, the distant toll of a bell, or the whisper of wind against shutters, creating a layered experience of sound that encouraged attention and mindfulness. The lighting of candles was a ritual in itself. Candles were trimmed, positioned, and lit with care, providing illumination that was soft and calming rather than harsh. The warm glow encouraged a sense of intimacy, drawing attention to textures, colors, and details often unnoticed in brighter light. Shadows danced across furniture, walls, and objects, offering a visual rhythm that complemented the auditory and tactile experiences of the evening. Each flame was a point of focus, fostering concentration and contemplation in those present. In the privacy of bedrooms and studies, individuals engaged in personal routines designed to prepare the mind and body for rest. Journals were consulted or maintained, thoughts carefully recorded and reflections noted. Reading might continue in bed or near a candle, the mind gradually slowing its pace while remaining gently occupied. The attention to detail, the turning of pages, the spacing of lines, the careful placement of books and writing implements reinforced a sense of order and calm. Evening activities were never rushed. Each gesture, each task was an opportunity to inhabit the present moment fully. Even simple household tasks retained their value as forms of meditative engagement. Folding linens, polishing objects, or arranging small decorative items required focus and precision. In the soft light of evening, these chores were imbued with a calm satisfaction, demonstrating that even ordinary actions could be integrated into a life of attentive leisure. The pace of activity slowed naturally as darkness settled, reinforcing the principle that intentional engagement, rather than hurried completion, was the measure of quality in daily life. Gardens, too, played a role in evening routines, though nightfall limited visibility. Well-tended paths and soft moonlight provided spaces for gentle walks or contemplative pauses. The sounds of nocturnal life, rustling leaves, distant water, and soft animal calls became companions for reflection. Strolling through a garden at twilight offered a transition between the daylight hours of measured activity and the deeper stillness of night. blendingobservation.com and mindfulness into a single experience. Evening gatherings sometimes occurred, though in smaller, more intimate settings than daytime salons. Close friends or family might share tea, discuss the day's events, or enjoy a quiet performance of music or poetry. Conversation remained measured, reflective, and considerate, with each participant encouraged to speak thoughtfully and listen attentively. The emphasis on quality over quantity created a rhythm that was restorative and sustaining, allowing the mind to unwind while remaining gently engaged. The use of scent and subtle environmental cues further reinforced the ambience of evening life. Incense, subtly perfumed oils, and the residual fragrance of flowers created an olfactory backdrop for calm and reflection. Soft fabrics, cushions, and draperies added tactile comfort, while careful attention to furniture arrangement encouraged both social interaction and solitary contemplation. Every detail was intentional, contributing to a holistic experience in which each sense was engaged without overwhelming the others. Nighttime also offered opportunities for quiet reflection on personal growth and accomplishment. Journals provided a medium to record observations, consider philosophical questions, or reflect on experiences from the day. The practice of reviewing one's thoughts fostered both discipline and mindfulness, reinforcing a habit of attentive awareness that complemented the larger rhythm of leisurely living. Reading, music, writing, and gentle movement were all integrated into a cohesive lifestyle that prioritized calm, considered engagement over haste or distraction. Even in the structured environment of 18th century households, there was room for personal spontaneity and creativity. Individuals could linger longer over a favorite passage of poetry, improvise a musical variation, or pause for a thoughtful gaze out a window into the evening sky. These small choices, made intentionally and without rush, defined the art of evening leisure. Presence, awareness, and attentiveness were cultivated not only through formal activities but also through the careful navigation of ordinary moments, each imbued with subtle meaning and value. The cyclical nature of day into night reinforced a broader understanding of time as a continuum of measured engagement. Morning and afternoon provided structured opportunities for activity and reflection, while evening allowed for consolidation, introspection, and gentle mental exploration. Together, these rhythms formed a holistic approach to life in which doing nothing was both purposeful and enriching, offering balance, harmony, and a sense of groundedness. Candlelight, music, reading, writing, garden walks, and deliberate household tasks converged to create a life characterized by attentiveness, calm, and quiet satisfaction. In these carefully curated moments, the 18th century individual experienced presence, reflection, and the subtle pleasure of mindfulness. Leisure was not merely an absence of labor, but a carefully orchestrated engagement with the world, one that nurtured intellect, emotion, and aesthetic appreciation simultaneously. Through these evening rituals, a subtle mastery of self emerged. The pace of life was intentionally tempered, allowing for gentle observation, slow thought, and the mindful cultivation of skills and sensibilities. The measured approach to activities, conversations, and personal routines reinforced the central principle that time was most valuable when attended to fully and deliberately. Even in doing nothing outwardly, the individual engaged deeply with the subtleties of life, cultivating richness in the quiet and nurturing a sustained sense of equilibrium and refinement. As darkness deepened across the cities and countryside of the 18th century, the world within the homes of the well-to-do slowed into a gentle stillness. Bedrooms, studies, and small sitting rooms became sanctuaries of calm, spaces carefully arranged to encourage reflection, comfort, and a quiet intimacy with oneself. The day's activity measured walks, conversations, music, reading, and household tasks gradually transitioned into moments of inward focus, a private rhythm aligned with the fading light and the soft flicker of candle flames. Beds were prepared with deliberate care. Linen was folded and smoothed, pillows arranged to provide comfort, and blankets layered to offer warmth. The act of preparing for sleep itself was a series of gestures attended to with mindfulness. Each movement, from straightening a sheet to adjusting a bolster, became an exercise in deliberate attention, reinforcing the rhythm of calm cultivated throughout the day. In these moments, even the simplest physical actions carried significance, contributing to the broader practice of leisure and attentive living. Reading remained a cherished component of evening life. By candlelight, individuals might return to books previously set aside during the day, immersing themselves in poetry, philosophy, or fictional narratives. Pages were turned slowly, each sentence absorbed fully, and ideas allowed to settle gently within the mind. The dim glow of the flame created a cocoon of intimacy, the surrounding darkness serving to heighten attention and soften distractions. Reading in this environment was as much about engaging the imagination as it was about absorbing information. The mind was invited to wander freely yet attentively within the safe, deliberate confines of the night. Music, though often quieter in the late hours, continued to provide a companion to reflection. A violin played softly in a corner, a harpsichord repeated familiar passages, or a simple melody hummed by an occupant of the household intertwined with the ambient sounds of the night. The music was subtle, never intrusive, designed to foster contemplation rather than command attention. Each note floated through the room, enhancing both emotional resonance and mental calm, blurring the boundary between sensory perception and thoughtful engagement. Letters and journals found a special place in nighttime routines. Ink met paper as correspondences were drafted or personal reflections recorded. The act of writing allowed for a measured exploration of thought, a careful organization of emotions, and a deliberate shaping of experience into narrative. Journals often served as mirrors for the mind, places to examine the day's observations, the fleeting impressions of interactions, and the subtle insights gleaned from prolonged periods of quiet attention. The pages became repositories of contemplation, a tangible extension of the inner life cultivated throughout the day. Bedrooms were intimate, spaces where personal comfort and aesthetic refinement converged. Draperies softened candlelight. Cushions provided gentle support, and small objects of beauty, an inlaid box, a delicate figurine. A carefully arranged bouquet created a tactile and visual harmony. Every detail was selected with attention, reinforcing the sense that the space was a haven for calm, thought, and gentle introspection. Here, the individual could observe and engage with both environment and self, cultivating an awareness that extended beyond mere preparation for sleep. The approach to sleep itself was gradual, a deliberate transition rather than an abrupt end to activity. Individuals might recline with a book, reflect on the day's conversations, or quietly meditate on the patterns of daily life. The candlelight provided enough illumination for observation and mental activity while signaling the slow descent into rest. Shadows elongated across the walls. Furniture took on softened contours, and the room's stillness encouraged a deepened awareness of presence. Sleep was anticipated, welcomed, and approached with the same care as any other practice of attentive leisure. Even the quiet sounds of the household contributed to the rhythm of nighttime. The distant tolling of a bell, the soft rustle of leaves in a gentle breeze, the faint creak of wooden floors, or the subdued murmur of a companion, reading or writing, each element was a subtle layer in the sensory tapestry of evening calm. These sounds were neither intrusive nor distracting. They provided texture and continuity, a gentle affirmation of life and presence within the quiet. The inhabitant of the household moved through these auditory cues with awareness, allowing the mind to attune itself to both detail and overall atmosphere. Personal reflection during the night often focused on introspection and emotional equilibrium. Individuals considered their responses to the day, their interactions, and the nuances of thought or feeling that had arisen. The evening provided an opportunity to examine motivations, temper emotional responses, and cultivate a balanced perspective. Reflection was deliberate yet gentle, an ongoing practice that reinforced self-awareness and a measured approach to life. In this way, the night became a teacher, offering lessons in calmness, patience, and attentive observation. Gardens and exterior spaces, though shadowed in the night, were sometimes included in these routines. A short walk under the moon or the contemplation of a quiet courtyard offered perspective and a continued connection with nature. The night air, cooler and scented with evening blooms, encouraged alert attention while simultaneously soothing the senses. Observing the subtle play of moonlight, the rustle of nocturnal creatures, and the gentle sounds of water or wind reinforced mindfulness and contributed to a sense of harmony between self and environment. The intimate rituals of evening extended to household tasks as well. Folding clothing, setting candles for the next day, arranging personal items, or caring for pets or small domestic animals were undertaken slowly and deliberately. Each act was an opportunity to engage with the present moment, transforming routine responsibilities into exercises in mindful attention. In these practices, the principles of 18th century leisure, presence, attentiveness, and deliberate pacing were fully realized. Nighttime solitude allowed for unstructured engagement with personal interests. One could linger over a musical instrument, experiment with artistic sketches, or explore the depths of philosophical reflection. These activities were never hurried or performed under external pressure. They were embraced for their intrinsic value and the calm focus they afforded. The boundaries of structured daily life softened, and freedom of thought was expressed within the safety and intimacy of candlelit rooms and carefully arranged environments. Even communal activities, when present, were imbued with restraint and gentle consideration. Families or close companions might share readings, softly exchange reflections, or listen together to music performed at low volume. Conversation maintained its measured rhythm, emphasizing thoughtful speech, attentive listening, and the cultivation of empathy. The goal was never entertainment in the modern sense, but rather shared calm, subtle enrichment, and the quiet satisfaction of mutually observed presence. In reflecting on the entirety of the evening, one can see how 18th century routines fostered a holistic approach to life. Physical comfort, intellectual engagement, aesthetic appreciation, and emotional balance were intertwined, each reinforcing the other. Attention to sensory experience, careful pacing of activity, and deliberate engagement with thought and creativity cultivated comprehensive sense of well-being. Doing nothing outwardly was never empty. It was an intentional immersion in the nuances of existence, a practice of presence that nurtured mind, body, and spirit simultaneously. The continuity of thought, music, writing, and reflection carried the individual from day into night, creating a seamless rhythm of attentiveness. Sleep was approached as a continuation of the day's mindful engagement, rather than a sudden cessation. The body rested, the mind continued gentle exploration through reflection and imagination, and the spirit absorbed the calm cultivated throughout hours of deliberate attention. In this way, the night became both restorative and instructive, offering lessons in patience, observation, and the quiet art of living fully. In the 18th century bedroom, the interplay of light, sound, and presence was carefully orchestrated. Candles, books, instruments, and objects of beauty created a sensory environment that encouraged mindfulness, reflection, and emotional equilibrium. The individual moved slowly through these surroundings, attending to each detail without urgency, integrating personal activity with contemplative stillness. Time was experienced not as a series of obligations, but as a continuum of attentive moments, each chosen with intention and care. Through these nocturnal practices, the philosophy of doing nothing reached its culmination. The deliberate pacing, attention to detail, and mindful engagement with environment and thought cultivated a profound sense of calm, awareness, and personal enrichment. Nighttime reflections, intimate rituals, and quiet interactions transformed the ordinary into an extraordinary practice of life, one in which presence, observation, and gentle attention were valued above all. The 18th century evening, with its candlelight, soft sounds, carefully curated spaces, and deliberate routines, exemplified a life rhythm in which leisure, reflection, and mindful attention were inseparable. Evenings became laboratories for the cultivation of intellect, emotion, and aesthetic sensibility, allowing the inhabitant to move seamlessly from day into night with grace. .com and attentive awareness. Doing nothing in this intimate context was an art, one that trained the mind, nurtured the spirit, and transformed the ordinary into a deeply satisfying experience of life itself. Beyond the confines of urban life, the 18th century offered opportunities for extended leisure through visits to country estates and seasonal retreats. These excursions were not hurried escapes, but deliberate immersions into spaces designed to nurture the senses, cultivate reflection, and reinforce the rhythms of attentive living. Wealthy families and scholars alike understood the restorative power of nature, the value of deliberate pacing, and the subtle pleasures afforded by seasonal variation in environment and activity. Traveling to an estate involved careful planning, often undertaken by carriage along winding roads, past rolling fields, small villages, and rivers that reflected the changing light of day. The journey itself was part of the experience, time to observe landscapes, engage in quiet conversation, and mentally prepare for the slower, more reflective pace that awaited in the countryside. Travelers would notice subtle shifts in air, the scent of forests and meadows, and the gradual diminution of urban sounds. Each element of travel was intended to ease the mind from the demands of city life and invite attentiveness to the surrounding world. Country estates were designed as extensions of the philosophy of leisure, cultivated in urban homes, expansive gardens, groves of trees, water features, and carefully planned vistas provided spaces for walking, contemplation, and observation. Each garden path was laid with intention, offering both aesthetic pleasure and opportunities for slow, reflective movement. Visitors might pause to examine a particular flower, listen to the gentle gurgle of a stream, or watch the play of sunlight across a carefully sculpted landscape. These spaces encouraged a continuity of mindful attention that extended naturally from the routines of the day. Seasonal variation shaped the experiences of leisure profoundly. Spring brought delicate blooms, the soft rustle of awakening foliage, and the aroma of fresh grass and blossoms. Summers offered longer days, allowing extended walks, picnics, and the enjoyment of sunlight filtering through trees. Autumn introduced subtle changes in color, cooler air, and the rhythmic pattern of harvesting, while winter's shorter days and quiet landscapes encouraged indoor activities, reflection, and attention to domestic comfort. Each season invited specific forms of engagement, creating a rhythm of annual life that emphasized attentiveness to the environment and the subtle cycles of nature. The structure of these retreats combined freedom and deliberate routine. Mornings were often spent walking through gardens, tending to the grounds, or observing natural phenomena such as bird migration, the progression of blooms, or patterns of light and shadow. These activities encouraged both physical presence and mental engagement, fostering an intimate awareness of the interconnectedness of natural processes. Even the act of walking, when approached without haste, became a meditative practice, blending movement with observation and reflection. Afternoons provided opportunities for more socialized forms of leisure. Small gatherings in shaded garden pavilions, drawing rooms, or libraries encouraged measured conversation, gentle debate, or quiet music. Hosts and guests engaged in dialogue that emphasized attentiveness and respect, allowing ideas to unfold slowly and thoughtfully. Music, as in urban homes, served to reinforce the atmosphere of calm, offering subtle accompaniment to conversation or providing solitary reflection for those who preferred quiet. The pace of discussion and activity was deliberate, ensuring that interactions remained restorative rather than taxing. Literature and creative pursuits were integral to the experience of the country estate. Private libraries, reading alcoves, and open-air writing desks allowed for extended engagement with books, letters, and journals. Individuals might compose poetry inspired by natural sources, explore philosophical treatises, or reflect on the observations of their daily walks. Journals served as repositories for thoughts, sensory impressions, and contemplations on seasonal change. The act of recording one's reflections became both a creative and meditative practice, reinforcing the continuity of attentive presence from morning through evening. Gardens and natural landscapes provided an extension of aesthetic principles developed in urban salons. Carefully arranged vistas, ornamental fountains, and geometrically aligned flower beds complemented the more spontaneous beauty of meadows, groves, and streams. Walks through these areas encouraged a dual engagement with deliberate design and natural irregularity, cultivating a heightened perception of subtle beauty. Visitors learned to notice patterns in growth, color, and texture, finding satisfaction in both planned and organic elements of the landscape. The social structure of retreats emphasized intimacy and quality over large-scale gatherings. Only close friends, family, or trusted colleagues participated in these extended leisure periods. Interaction was measured, respectful, and reflective, emphasizing attentive listening, thoughtful speech, and a shared appreciation for subtle pleasures. Music might be performed privately, small games or puzzles enjoyed, or quiet conversation held in rooms arranged for comfort and aesthetic appeal. The emphasis was never on competition or spectacle, but on a deep engagement with the environment, companions, and oneself. Seasonal leisure also incorporated practical observation and engagement with the estate itself. Understanding the rhythm of agricultural work, the care of livestock, or the maintenance of gardens offered opportunities for both learning and reflection. Even tasks that might appear laborious were approached deliberately, with attention to detail and appreciation for process. These activities reinforced the principle that engagement, mindfulness, and thoughtful observation was central to the art of leisure, regardless of the scale or nature of the task. In the late afternoon and early evening, the estate shifted into a quieter rhythm. Candlelight or lanterns were brought out, casting soft illumination across rooms and gardens. Music became more subtle, and conversations slowed to a gentle murmur, reading and reflection took precedence, and individuals often retreated to private chambers to record impressions, contemplate observations, or prepare for the transition into night. The pace of life at this hour emphasized restorative calm, allowing the mind and body to absorb the accumulated experiences of the day. Evening walks in gardens or along estate paths encouraged gentle physical activity while maintaining the contemplative quality of the retreat. The sounds of the countryside at twilight, rustling leaves, birds settling, distant streams provided a sensory layer for reflection. Observing the gradual transition from light to dark reinforced awareness of time, seasonal rhythm, and the interconnectedness of natural processes. Each step taken slowly and attentively became a meditation, a continuation of the deliberate attention cultivated throughout the day. Nighttime in the estate followed principles similar to those observed in urban homes. Bedrooms were prepared with care, candles or lanterns positioned to provide soft light, and spaces arranged for comfort and aesthetic coherence. Journals, books, and writing implements remained close at hand, allowing for last-minute reflection or recording of observations before sleep. Even in the quiet intimacy of personal chambers, the principles of attentive presence and deliberate pacing persisted, forming a continuous thread from morning to night. Through these extended retreats, the inhabitants of 8 estates experienced a holistic form of leisure that combined sensory engagement, intellectual activity, physical movement, and reflective practice. Each moment was designed to nurture awareness, cultivate calm, and encourage thoughtful engagement with both environment and self. The rhythm of seasonal change, garden paths, music, reading, and measured social interaction created a life in which doing nothing outwardly was never idle, but a deliberate practice of presence and appreciation. The continuity between city life and country retreats reinforced a central principle of 18th century leisure. Attentive engagement, mindful pacing, and reflective practice were applicable across spaces, activities, and seasons. Whether walking through urban salons, tending to garden beds, reading by candlelight, or strolling estate grounds, the individual cultivated the same quiet attentiveness that characterized the philosophy of the day. Each gesture, conversation, and observation was an exercise in presence, forming a life rhythm in which calm, reflection, and appreciation were paramount. By integrating sensory awareness, intellectual engagement, social subtlety, and physical attention, the retreat became a laboratory for the art of living slowly and thoughtfully. Music, gardens, writing, seasonal observation, and domestic care worked together to create a comprehensive framework for mindful life. These practices, though simple, reinforced a profound understanding. Richness of experience comes not from haste or accumulation, but from attentiveness, presence, and deliberate interaction with the world. In the rhythm of 18th century life, the passage of seasons was marked not only by natural change, but by festivals and celebrations that encouraged communal leisure, reflection, and subtle social engagement. These occasions, whether religious, civic, or cultural, offered opportunities to step away from daily routines and immerse oneself in experiences carefully balanced between observation, participation, and contemplation, while the modern imagination might envision festivals as noisy spectacles. In this period, they were often deliberate, restrained, and refined, emphasizing the quality of engagement over exuberant display. Spring festivals marked renewal and growth. Flower markets, small fairs, and outdoor gatherings celebrated the awakening of nature after winter's dormancy. Families and friends would stroll among blossoming trees, exchanging observations about colors, forms, and fragrances. Music, often provided by small ensembles, accompanied the gentle chatter of visitors, creating a backdrop of harmony that reinforced the calm rhythm of the day. The festival's purpose was both aesthetic and social. Participants were invited to notice subtleties, savor sensory experiences, and engage in measured conversation, cultivating appreciation for both natural beauty and refined social exchange. Summer brought extended daylight, allowing for more elaborate and leisurely celebrations, picnics on estate lawns, evening concerts in gardens, and intimate gatherings in shaded pavilions offered extended periods of calm engagement. Guests were encouraged to walk slowly, observe thoughtfully, and participate in activities that balanced enjoyment with reflection. Music and poetry readings were central to these occasions, blending sensory pleasure with intellectual stimulation. Conversation remained measured and attentive, emphasizing listening, observation, and the thoughtful exchange of ideas rather than rapid or superficial dialogue. Autumn festivals highlighted seasonal abundance and communal labor. Harvest celebrations, modest fairs, and gatherings at local markets provided opportunities to witness the fruits of careful cultivation. Participants were encouraged to move through spaces slowly, noting subtle shifts in color, texture, and atmosphere. The scent of ripened fruit, freshly turned earth, and autumn foliage created an olfactory landscape that complemented visual observation. The festivals emphasized rhythm and pattern, drawing attention to the cyclical nature of life, the labor behind sustenance, and the quiet satisfaction derived from both observation and participation. Winter celebrations were more introspective, often centered around indoor spaces, candlelight, and close social interaction. Religious holidays, private gatherings, and small concerts allowed for reflection, artistic engagement, and gentle social exchange. Candles and fireplaces provided soft illumination, creating intimate settings in which conversation, music, and shared readings could unfold slowly. These occasions reinforced the principles of 18th century leisure, attentiveness, measured interaction, and mindful appreciation of both environment and companions. The design and structure of festival spaces reflected the broader aesthetic and philosophical principles of the period. Gardens, halls, and rooms were arranged to create subtle visual and sensory cues, guiding participants through experiences in a manner that balanced freedom with deliberate attention. Music, floral arrangements, decorative objects, and lighting all contributed to an atmosphere that encouraged reflection, observation, and gentle social engagement. Participants were subtly guided to move, pause and observe in ways that cultivated both personal and communal calm. Social rituals were integral to these celebrations. Greetings, exchanges of compliments, and courteous conversation were conducted with measured tone and deliberate pacing. Each interaction provided an opportunity to practice attentiveness, respect, and refined expression. Social subtleties, from the careful arrangement of gestures to the modulation of speech, were as important as the content of conversation itself. In this context, leisure extended beyond passive enjoyment. It became an exercise in awareness, empathy, and social refinement. Music remained a central component of seasonal festivities. Ensembles performed compositions designed to complement the mood of the season and the specific occasion. Melodies were subtle, harmonies carefully arranged, and performances delivered in a manner that encouraged listening, contemplation, and emotional attunement. Unlike modern festivals, which often prioritize spectacle, 18th century performances emphasized intimacy, quality, and attentiveness. Participants were invited to internalize the music, allowing it to guide reflection, mood, and social rhythm. Food and drink were integrated into the celebrations in ways that reflected the broader principles of mindful leisure. Seasonal fruits, light pastries, simple meats, and subtly spiced beverages were served in a deliberate and unhurried manner. Consumption was measured with attention to taste, texture, and aroma. Meals functioned as both sustenance and sensory experience, complementing the visual, auditory, and tactile pleasures of the festival environment. Eating was never rushed. Each bite became an opportunity to savor, observe, and integrate sensory experience with the rhythm of the occasion. Outdoor spaces during festivals encouraged movement that blended observation, socialization, and contemplative engagement. Paths through gardens, courtyards, and fields were designed to guide participants gently, offering pauses for reflection, views of seasonal change, and moments of quiet observation. The interplay of natural and designed environments allowed participants to engage simultaneously with cultivated beauty and organic irregularity, fostering attentiveness, curiosity, and subtle aesthetic appreciation. Evenings during festivals emphasized quiet reflection and intimate engagement. Candlelight, fireplaces, and soft music created spaces for gentle conversation, reading, or solitary thought. These nocturnal components reinforced principles established throughout the day: attentiveness, mindfulness, and appreciation for both environment and social interaction. Nighttime rituals within festival contexts mirrored those of daily life, extending the philosophy of deliberate leisure into communal settings while maintaining personal calm and contemplative presence. Participants were encouraged to balance social interaction with private reflection. Small moments of solitude, walking quietly in a garden, observing the play of light on a fountain, or pausing to listen to distant music were considered valuable and integral to the experience of leisure. The interplay between collective engagement and individual attention created a rhythm that nurtured both communal harmony and personal insight. Each participant learned to navigate the balance between external stimulation and internal reflection, cultivating awareness, patience, and subtle aesthetic appreciation. The recurring cycle of festivals reinforced seasonal awareness and attunement to natural rhythms. Spring, summer, autumn, and winter each brought distinct sensory experiences, social structures, and reflective opportunities. Participants became attuned to the subtleties of light, color, scent, and sound associated with each period. Attention to these seasonal variations cultivated perception, patience, and a deepened sense of temporal awareness. Leisure, in this context, was inseparable from observation, reflection, and the rhythm of the natural world. Children and younger participants were introduced to these principles gently, often through guided observation and participation. They learned to walk slowly, observe attentively, engage in polite conversation, and appreciate subtle pleasures. Music, storytelling, and seasonal games provided education in both skill and mindfulness, nurturing a gradual understanding of deliberate engagement, attentiveness, and refined social practice. Through these experiences, the principles of 18th century leisure were transmitted across generations, reinforcing continuity and cultural coherence. Decorative arts and visual details played a subtle yet essential role in festival experiences. Arrangements of flowers, patterned textiles, lanterns, and ornamental objects guided attention, creating opportunities for observation, reflection, and aesthetic pleasure. Participants were invited to notice these subtleties, integrating sensory perception with contemplative thought. In doing so, even the smallest details became instruments for cultivating awareness, mindfulness, and appreciation of both human craftsmanship and natural beauty. Through seasonal festivals and leisurely celebrations, individuals cultivated a life rhythm that integrated sensory engagement, social refinement, intellectual stimulation, and reflective practice. Each event carefully structured yet allowing for personal interpretation, reinforced principles of attentiveness, patience, and subtle enjoyment. Participation in these occasions trained both perception and temperament, nurturing an understanding of leisure as a comprehensive, deliberate, and deeply satisfying engagement with life. In the 18th century, the cultivation of the mind was considered as essential to leisure as music, gardens, or seasonal retreats. Intellectual pastimes were carefully integrated into daily and seasonal routines, offering opportunities for reflection, skill development, and measured social interaction. These activities, whether solitary or shared, reinforced the rhythm of attentive engagement that defined the art of living slowly, thoughtfully, and deliberately. Chess, a favorite pastime among the educated elite, exemplified this approach. Played with deliberate pace, the game demanded careful observation, patience, and strategic thinking. Each movement of a piece was considered, the consequences anticipated, and the mind engaged in a quiet, focused exploration of possibility. Opponents listened attentively, respecting the silent deliberation of each move, creating a space in which intellect and calm presence intertwined. Chess was not merely competition. It was an exercise in mental discipline, observation, and thoughtful interaction. Card games also featured prominently. Though they were approached with measured attention, games such as whist, piquet, and Ombra required calculation, memory, and patience, encouraging participants to remain alert while maintaining composure. The social dimension of these games reinforced politeness, etiquette, and the subtleties of measured response. Players learned to balance focus with graciousness, cultivating emotional regulation alongside intellectual engagement. Even games of chance were integrated into a broader practice of attentive leisure, blending unpredictability with deliberate observation. Reading and literary discussion remained central to intellectual engagement. Libraries, often curated with care, provided access to poetry, novels, philosophical treatises, and scientific texts. Individuals read slowly, savoring language, contemplating ideas, and allowing reflection to unfold naturally. Reading was frequently followed by discussion, either in private salons or intimate gatherings, where participants explored interpretations, debated perspectives, and refined their understanding through respectful dialogue. The rhythm of these exchanges emphasized listening, thoughtfulness, and the deliberate articulation of ideas. Scientific curiosity also found expression in leisure activities, observing celestial movements, conducting simple experiments, or cataloging specimens in natural history. Collections offered opportunities for focused engagement with the world. Each observation was recorded meticulously, often in journals that combined personal reflection with empirical notation. The deliberate pace of such investigation encouraged careful attention, reflection on patterns, and the cultivation of precision, patience, and curiosity. Language learning and writing were additional dimensions of intellectual pastime. Correspondence with scholars or friends in distant cities allowed for exchange of ideas and refinement of expression. Poetry, essays, and letters were composed with deliberate care, often reread and revised before being sent. The process of composition itself reinforced mindfulness, patience, and the careful organization of thought. Integrating creativity with reflective practice, board games designed to stimulate reasoning, such as backgammon, also held a place in intellectual leisure. Moves were considered thoughtfully, risks assessed, and patterns anticipated. Success depended not only on strategy, but on patience and attentiveness, qualities that mirrored broader principles of 18th century living. These games were practiced with a quiet focus that encouraged engagement without haste, teaching participants the value of measured response and thoughtful calculation. Musical study provided yet another avenue for intellectual and sensory engagement. Learning an instrument required disciplined practice, careful listening, and attentive observation of technique. Progress was gradual, cultivated over months or years, emphasizing refinement and mastery rather than immediate gratification. The slow accumulation of skill mirrored broader principles of leisure, attentive focus, deliberate pacing, and sustained engagement over time. Music, in this sense, became both a sensory pleasure and an intellectual exercise, linking mind and body through practice and performance. Observation of natural phenomena, from the changing seasons to patterns in animal behavior, offered additional opportunities for reflection and learning. Estate gardens, rural walks, and city parks became laboratories for attentive study. Participants recorded details, compared observations, and reflected on relationships between cause and effect. Even seemingly mundane details were noted, contributing to a habit of focused attention and sustained curiosity. This integration of observation into leisurely activity reinforced the principle that awareness and attentiveness was central to the art of living. Solitary reflection and meditation were considered vital components of intellectual pastime. Quiet moments alone, whether spent journaling, contemplating the natural world, or reviewing the day's experiences, allowed the mind to organize, integrate, and synthesize information. Such reflection strengthened memory, deepened understanding, and fostered a deliberate, unhurried rhythm of thought. These moments were not idle. They were exercises in mental cultivation, a means of nurturing insight, composure, and attentiveness. Social intellectual activities also included structured discussions, debates, and lectures in private salons. Participants were expected to speak thoughtfully, listen carefully, and respond with measured consideration. The aim was not to dominate a conversation, but to contribute in refining both understanding and social grace. This practice nurtured an appreciation for nuance, patience, and respect for differing perspectives. Attentiveness to language, tone, and the subtleties of argument became exercises in both intellectual and emotional refinement. Artistic pursuits were further intertwined with intellectual engagement. Sketching, painting, and model making offered opportunities to explore perspective, proportion, and detail. These activities encouraged observation, patience, and precision. Like musical practice, they demanded repetition, focus, and deliberate refinement over time. The creative act was both reflective and sensory, allowing the practitioner to engage fully with perception, technique, and aesthetic judgment. Participation in salons, both urban and seasonal, reinforced the integration of intellectual leisure with social refinement. Conversations ranged from poetry and literature to scientific theory and philosophical debate. Guests moved deliberately between discussion topics, balancing engagement with listening, allowing ideas to unfold gradually and meaningfully. Intellectual pursuit was inseparable from social practice, emphasizing measured communication, reflective response, and careful observation of both content and context. The design of spaces for intellectual pastimes reflected the principles of attentive engagement. Libraries, studies, and drawing rooms were arranged to minimize distraction and maximize comfort. Lighting and access to tools of study, objects of curiosity, maps, globes, scientific instruments, art pieces were positioned to encourage observation, exploration, and reflection. Participants navigated these spaces slowly, integrating sensory awareness, cognitive effort, and contemplative focus into a seamless experience of deliberate leisure. Intellectual games and pursuits were frequently interwoven with daily and seasonal routines. Morning or afternoon walks might be accompanied by observation of natural patterns or reflection on ideas previously studied. Even routine activities, such as arranging flowers, tending a garden, or observing animal behavior, were approached with a degree of analytical attention. blending practical engagement with cognitive cultivation. The practice of intellectual leisure extended beyond formal games or study sessions, permeating ordinary life with attentiveness and reflective habit. The integration of intellectual pastimes into 18th century life reinforced a broader philosophy. Leisure was most valuable when it combined sensory, cognitive, and social engagement with measured attention and reflective practice. Games, music, writing, observation, and artistic creation were not distractions from productivity, but integral components of a deliberate, attentive life. Through these pursuits, the mind was trained to notice, analyze, and appreciate subtleties, cultivating insight, patience, and composure. Even solitary activities retained social and reflective significance. Writing letters, recording observations, or composing poetry might eventually be shared with friends, family, or colleagues, reinforcing communal bonds and intellectual exchange. The slow, deliberate pace of these interactions ensured that communication was thoughtful, measured, and meaningful, extending the principles of attentive leisure across time and space. Through the careful cultivation of intellectual pastimes, the 18th century individual achieved a balance between mind, body, and environment. Engagement with games, music, literature, and observation fostered both cognitive development and aesthetic sensitivity. Reflection, measurement, and attentiveness were central to each activity, embedding the philosophy of deliberate leisure into the rhythm of daily life. Doing nothing outwardly was never idle. It was the cultivation of perception, patience, and understanding, reinforcing a life of richness, calm, and intentional presence. Within the quiet chambers of 18th century homes, private studies served as a central pillar of cultivated leisure. Scholars, gentlemen, and women of letters retreated to carefully arranged spaces designed for reflection, learning, and intellectual refinement. These rooms, whether located in urban townhouses, countryside estates, or private apartments, embodied the principles of attentive presence, deliberate pacing, and mindful engagement that defined the period's approach to leisure and self-cultivation. The preparation of a study was itself a meticulous exercise. Books were arranged according to subject, size, or accessibility. Writing implements, ink, and paper were carefully maintained, and seating was chosen for comfort and suitability for extended periods of focus. Lighting, whether from windows, candles, or lanterns, was adjusted to minimize strain and create an atmosphere conducive to sustained concentration. Every element of the room was intended to support the cultivation of wisdom, emphasizing order, clarity, and the gentle harmonization of sensory input. Morning hours often began with reading, sometimes accompanied by note-taking or transcription. Classical texts, philosophical treatises, scientific observations, and contemporary literature were absorbed deliberately, line by line, allowing the mind to process and reflect upon meaning fully. Margins were annotated with personal insights, comparisons, and questions, creating a dynamic interplay between the external text and the internal thought processes of the scholar. In this manner, reading became both an intellectual and contemplative act, integrating observation, interpretation, and reflection. Writing, whether in the form of letters, essays, or treatises, was approached with equal deliberation. Each word was considered for meaning, cadence, and impact. Drafts were reread, revised, and occasionally set aside for further reflection before completion. Writing was not merely a means of communication. It was a disciplined exercise in clarity of thought, logical progression, and the cultivation of a deliberate and expressive mind. The rhythm of writing, alternating periods of creation, reflection, and correction encouraged patience, persistence, and thoughtful engagement with ideas. Journaling and private reflection complemented scholarly study. Individuals recorded daily observations, philosophical musings, or summaries of readings. These journals became repositories of insight, allowing for longitudinal examination of thought and development of understanding over time. The practice of documenting ideas encouraged consistency, self-awareness, and the refinement of reasoning. Each entry was approached with calm attentiveness, transforming ordinary reflection into a deliberate exercise in cognitive cultivation. Correspondence with distant colleagues, mentors, and friends further enriched private study. Letters were composed slowly. Each sentence weighed for accuracy, elegance, and intent. Responses were awaited with patience, providing intervals for reflection and additional study. This practice of thoughtful communication reinforced both intellectual rigor and the cultivation of social grace, emphasizing careful observation, measured language, and empathy within the written exchange. Libraries, central to private study, were curated with attention to both accessibility and thematic coherence. Shelves were organized according to subjects such as philosophy, natural sciences, history, literature, or practical arts. Rare or prized texts were displayed with care, often accompanied by related notes, sketches, or commentaries. The act of selecting a book itself became an intentional exercise in focus and awareness, requiring consideration of current inquiries, intellectual priorities, and personal curiosity. The physical environment of study reinforced attentiveness. Comfortable chairs and desks, proper ventilation, and controlled lighting allowed the body to remain at ease, while the mind engaged fully. Decorative elements such as maps, globes, botanical illustrations, or scientific instruments provided visual and cognitive stimulation without overwhelming attention. Even subtle features, the scent of paper, the sound of turning pages, or the soft scratching of quill on parchment contributed to a sensory rhythm that facilitated focus.com and prolonged engagement. Time was measured carefully in private study. Extended periods of reading, writing, or reflection were punctuated with brief pauses to stretch, observe surroundings, or review notes. These intervals reinforced attentiveness, prevented fatigue, and allowed insight to percolate naturally. The scholar's day unfolded according to a deliberate rhythm, balancing activity and stillness, focus and reflection, engagement and repose. Through this rhythm, wisdom was cultivated not only through knowledge acquisition but through sustained, mindful presence and methodical practice. Observation and experimentation were integrated seamlessly into scholarly work. Individuals might record patterns in natural phenomena, conduct simple laboratory exercises, or compare textual sources to draw conclusions. Such inquiry demanded patience, precision, and careful attention to detail. Observations were logged meticulously, with subsequent reflection providing insight into causal relationships, patterns, or anomalies. Through this methodical approach, the scholar learned to navigate complexity calmly, integrating empirical observation with contemplative reasoning. Intellectual engagement often extended to the visual and creative arts. Sketching, diagramming, and mapping were used to clarify thought, record phenomena, or communicate concepts. These exercises combine perception, precision, and aesthetic awareness, linking cognitive and sensory faculties. The practice of visual representation complemented reading and writing, fostering a multidimensional approach to understanding and learning. Each line drawn, each observation recorded, became part of a continuous exercise in deliberate attention and intellectual cultivation. Private study also encompassed the practice of self-discipline and moral reflection. Scholars considered ethical questions, personal goals, and the alignment of actions with principles of virtue. Journals, letters, and reflections were used to examine habits, choices, and priorities, reinforcing self-awareness and deliberate engagement with life's challenges. In this context, study was both an intellectual and ethical practice, intertwining knowledge acquisition with the cultivation of character. Social interaction, though limited within private study, played a subtle but significant role. Visitors might engage in discussion, critique, or collaborative reflection. These interactions were approached with measured attention, fostering respectful exchange, patience, and refinement of argument. The scholar learned to integrate external perspectives into ongoing contemplation, balancing solitude with meaningful engagement. The interplay of private reflection and carefully moderated social interaction strengthened both intellectual and interpersonal faculties. The seasonal rhythm influenced private study as well. Longer daylight hours allowed extended periods of observation, reading and note-taking outdoors or in well-lit studies. Winter evenings encouraged prolonged indoor reflection, writing, and creative exploration. Awareness of temporal cycles reinforced attentiveness to natural patterns, the passing of time, and the rhythm of intellectual cultivation. Through alignment with seasonal changes, scholars experienced continuity and variation, deepening the integration of study into life's broader temporal fabric. Even meals and daily routines were incorporated into the framework of study. Simple, unhurried breakfasts or afternoon teas provided time for reflection, review of notes, or preliminary consideration of new inquiries. The interweaving of physical sustenance with mental engagement exemplified the holistic approach to attentive leisure in which body, mind, and environment were harmonized. Every activity, however small, was an opportunity to practice mindfulness, reinforce habit, and nurture insight. Through private study, the individual cultivated a comprehensive skill set: observation, critical thinking, creativity, ethical reflection, and refined communication. Each day's deliberate attention, methodical approach, an integration of sensory, intellectual, and social elements reinforced the principles of 18th century leisure. Doing nothing outwardly was never idle. It was a deliberate exercise in cultivating presence, clarity, and understanding. The scholar, seated in quiet contemplation, engaged simultaneously with knowledge, observation, and reflection, building a life of deliberate attention and cultivated wisdom. The practice of private study exemplified the ideal of deliberate, mindful living. Intellectual work was intertwined with sensory awareness, reflection, and aesthetic engagement, creating a seamless rhythm of learning, observation, and personal growth. Through careful attention to environment, methodical pursuit of knowledge, and reflective practice, the individual developed a profound sense of composure, insight, and purpose. In the quiet of study, wisdom was nurtured, and the art of doing nothing, outwardly yet achieving everything intellectually, was realized fully. As the day waned, 18th century individuals increasingly turned inward, embracing the quiet hours for reflection, contemplation, and philosophical meditation. Evening, illuminated by the soft glow of candles or lanterns, became a time for integrating the lessons of the day, synthesizing observations, and harmonizing intellect with emotion. The practice of contemplative evening activity was an essential component of the art of living deliberately, reinforcing both personal insight and mindful presence. The environment of evening reflection was deliberately curated to facilitate calm attentiveness. Reading rooms, studies, or private chambers were softly illuminated, free from unnecessary distraction. Books, instruments, journals, and objects of personal significance were arranged to encourage observation, mental exploration, and sensory awareness. Candles were positioned to create pools of light, highlighting manuscripts, instruments, or visual aids, while leaving surrounding spaces in gentle shadow. This interplay of light and darkness promoted a sense of quiet focus, subtly guiding attention toward reflection and inward thought. Reading continued to play a central role in evening contemplation. Philosophical treatises, poetry, moral essays, and scientific reflections were engaged with slowly, line by line. The mind was invited to linger on concepts, two-way alternative interpretations, and to trace the implications of ideas for both thought and conduct. Marginalia and journals captured insights, questions, and connections, transforming reading into an active, reflective practice. Through this process, learning was internalized, integrated with prior knowledge, and prepared for thoughtful application in future action. Journaling and written reflection were equally vital. Individuals documented observations, summarized insights, or composed personal meditations. Writing was approached deliberately with attention to language, clarity, and expressive subtlety. Each entry became a repository of thought, allowing subsequent review, comparison, and synthesis. Journals functioned as mirrors for the mind, offering both continuity and a structured medium for fostering insight, moral reflection, and intellectual cohesion. Philosophical reflection extended beyond textual engagement. Individuals contemplated ethical, aesthetic, and existential questions, weighing personal conduct, societal expectations, and the rhythms of nature, even simple observations, the fading of light, the coolness of evening air, the subtle sounds of the household prompted meditation on temporality, human experience, and the interconnectedness of life. The practice of reflection was deliberate yet gentle, fostering awareness, balance, and emotional regulation alongside intellectual growth. Music and sound complemented evening contemplation. A lone instrument, softly played, or recorded sounds of distant wind or water provided a rhythmical backdrop for thought. Music was subtle, measured, and intentionally quiet, reinforcing rather than dominating reflection. The interplay between auditory stimuli and mental engagement deepened. Attentiveness encouraged emotional resonance and provided a subtle structure for prolonged periods of meditation. Walking through gardens, corridors, or private courtyards offered an additional dimension to evening contemplation. Slow, deliberate movement encouraged both physical ease and cognitive clarity. Observations of shadows, the shimmer of moonlight, or the fragrance of nocturnal blooms heightened sensory awareness, linking body, environment, and mind in a holistic rhythm. The act of walking became a meditative practice, integrating reflection, perception, and attentive presence in a continuous, seamless experience. Even social interaction, when present in evening settings, was approached with restraint and attentiveness. Guests or family members engaged in quiet dialogue, exchanging insights, reflections, and interpretations. Conversations emphasized listening, measured response, and thoughtful articulation, reinforcing principles of deliberate social engagement. Intellectual, aesthetic, and ethical topics were explored with patience, allowing ideas to unfold gradually and meaningfully. Through this practice, social interaction became an extension of reflective cultivation rather than a distraction from it. The integration of learning into daily life was a central theme of evening reflection. Lessons from reading, observation, or conversation were examined for practical application, moral insight, and personal growth. Scholars and reflective individuals considered how principles, observations, and philosophical ideas could inform conduct, choices, and interpersonal relations. The evening became a time to bridge theoretical understanding with lived experience, weaving knowledge seamlessly into the fabric of daily life. Meditative practices were common, often unstructured yet deliberate. Individuals engaged in silent contemplation, mentally reviewing events, insights, and emotional responses. Such reflection cultivated mindfulness, self-regulation, and clarity of thought. Even the quiet observation of one's own breath, posture, or emotional state contributed to the integration of mind and body, enhancing calmness, focus, and presence. Seasonal awareness continued to shape evening contemplation. Changes in light, temperature, and natural rhythms provided cues for reflection on the passage of time, the cyclical nature of life, and the transience of experience. Observing subtle seasonal shifts encouraged perspective, patience, and an appreciation for both continuity and impermanence. These observations were integrated with intellectual, ethical, and aesthetic reflection, reinforcing holistic attentiveness and mindful engagement. Reading and discussion of contemporary literature and philosophical Discourse encouraged dialogue between tradition and innovation. Evening reflection often included consideration of new ideas, alongside established knowledge, balancing curiosity with discernment. The deliberate pacing of study, reflection, and discussion allowed time for nuanced evaluation, ensuring that insights were integrated thoughtfully rather than superficially. This method reinforced the cultivation of judgment, patience, and intellectual resilience. Ethical reflection occupied a significant place in evening contemplation. Individuals examined personal conduct, social responsibilities, and moral principles, considering alignment between values and actions. Journals and letters often recorded these reflections, providing an ongoing record of ethical thought and practical intention. Reflection encouraged empathy and deliberate decision-making, reinforcing the integration of intellectual, emotional, and ethical cultivation into a coherent practice of life. Incorporation of visual observation further enriched evening practice. Sketching, diagramming, or careful note-taking allowed for precise engagement with detail, linking perception with conceptual understanding. Artistic and scientific observation intertwined, emphasizing both accuracy and aesthetic sensibility. Through these practices, contemplation became multidimensional, engaging mind, body, and senses in a cohesive rhythm of attention. Even household rituals, arranging books, preparing writing implements, or adjusting lighting were integrated into the rhythm of reflection. These small, deliberate acts reinforced attentiveness, presence, and deliberate pacing, maintaining the continuity of mindful engagement throughout the evening. Through careful orchestration of environment, action, and observation, the individual cultivated a seamless interplay between physical, intellectual, and emotional faculties. Through nightly practice, individuals developed the capacity for sustained focus, nuanced judgment, and calm deliberation. Reflection was both personal and social, integrating experience, knowledge, and moral insight. Evening contemplation served to consolidate learning, refine perception, and harmonize the rhythms of thought, emotion, and environment. The 18th century ideal emphasized that leisure was not passive, but a deliberate cultivation of mind, character, and presence. In this reflective space, doing nothing outwardly was never idle. Observing, pondering, writing, listening, and walking with awareness were considered as vital as formal study or active labor. Each evening, the rhythm of contemplation, sensory engagement, and ethical evaluation reinforced the continuity of knowledge, experience, and presence. The individual achieved a balance of calm, attentiveness, and insight, preparing the mind and spirit for the transition into sleep and a continuation of deliberate living in subsequent days. Even as candlelight waned and darkness deepened, the mind remained engaged, quietly integrating the day's observations, ideas, and ethical considerations. Reflection extended seamlessly into imagination, problem-solving, and creative thought, bridging conscious awareness and subtle cognitive processing. In this manner, evening contemplation served as both closure and preparation, concluding the day's practice of attentive living while laying the groundwork for continued growth, mindfulness, and intellectual engagement. Through this deliberate evening practice, 18th century individuals exemplified a life in which learning, reflection, and attentiveness were inseparable from daily existence. Knowledge, observation, and ethical insight were not compartmentalized, but woven into the fabric of routine. Social interaction and private contemplation, the rhythm of evening reflection provided a gentle, structured space for integrating mind, body, and spirit, demonstrating that the art of doing nothing outwardly was, in reality, a profound exercise in presence, wisdom, and the deliberate cultivation of life itself. The 18th century ideal of leisure was a holistic practice, integrating observation, reflection, social refinement, intellectual engagement, and ethical cultivation into a seamless rhythm of life, across seasons, spaces, and activities. Individuals were guided by principles of attentiveness, deliberate pacing, and mindful presence. Leisure was not mere idleness, but a deliberate art, a structured engagement with both internal and external worlds, emphasizing depth, continuity, and thoughtful participation, from the structured routines of daily life to the extended retreats in country estates. The cultivation of presence was central. Mornings were often devoted to observation, exercise, and engagement with sensory and intellectual environments. Attention to small details, the texture of a garden path, the quality of light in a study, the cadence of music formed the foundation of perception, training the mind to notice, analyze, and reflect each gesture, movement, and act, though subtle, reinforced attentiveness, transforming ordinary actions into exercises in deliberate awareness. Seasonal variation structured the rhythm of engagement. Spring, summer, autumn, and winter each brought distinct sensory, social, and cognitive experiences. Spring invited renewal and observation of emerging life. Summer encouraged extended exploration and socialized leisure. Autumn highlighted abundance, reflection, and sensory richness. Winter fostered contemplation, study, and quiet connection. Alignment with seasonal patterns reinforced a temporal awareness, connecting individual experience to the larger cycles of nature and encouraging a measured, patient approach to both daily life and long-term pursuits. Social interaction, carefully moderated, provided both structure and enrichment. Salons, small gatherings, and festive occasions emphasized polite conversation, attentive listening, and measured participation. The quality of dialogue was prioritized over quantity or spectacle. Engagement was deliberate, promoting reflection, insight, and shared understanding. Social rituals, from greetings to conversation etiquette, cultivated both emotional and intellectual refinement, demonstrating that interaction itself could be a form of attentive leisure. Music, art, and aesthetic appreciation formed an integral dimension of daily and seasonal life. Listening to or performing music, sketching, observing gardens, and attending exhibitions provided both sensory pleasure and intellectual exercise. Engagement with aesthetic experience required focused attention, emotional regulation, and reflective thought, reinforcing the principles of deliberate practice and attentive observation that permeated all forms of leisure. artistic experience was simultaneously restorative, educational, and socially reinforcing. Games and intellectual pursuits offered further dimensions for cultivating the mind. Chess, card games, backgammon, writing, and study required careful calculation, patience, and strategic observation. These activities nurtured reasoning, memory, and attentiveness while reinforcing social grace and ethical comportment. Intellectual leisure, whether solitary or shared, was practiced with measured pace and contemplative awareness, highlighting the interplay between cognitive engagement and personal cultivation. Private study and journaling exemplified the integration of reflective practice into daily life. Individuals engaged deeply with texts, composed writings, recorded observations, and contemplated ethical and philosophical questions. These practices cultivated clarity of thought, ethical sensibility, and methodical intellectual discipline. The act of reflection was ongoing, continuous, and seamlessly integrated into daily rhythms, ensuring that leisure extended beyond entertainment or diversion to become an intentional, transformative engagement with life. Evening contemplation served as the culmination of daily practices. Candlelight, quiet spaces, and measured pacing encouraged reflection on the day's experiences, integration of knowledge, and meditation on personal conduct. Observations, intellectual insights, and emotional responses were synthesized, preparing the mind for restful sleep and guiding intention for subsequent days. Evening reflection reinforced the principles cultivated throughout the day, forming a cyclical rhythm in which experience, learning, and mindfulness were continually reinforced. Throughout these practices, the body and environment were carefully aligned with cognitive and ethical cultivation. Furniture, lighting, spatial arrangement, and seasonal adjustments supported comfort, attentiveness, and focus. Physical movement, walking, tending gardens, or practicing music was coordinated with intellectual and reflective engagement, creating a harmonious integration of mind, body, and environment. The 18th century approach emphasized that leisure was comprehensive, encompassing sensory awareness, intellectual engagement, social grace, ethical reflection, and physical presence. The practice of attentiveness extended to seemingly mundane aspects of life. Meals were consumed deliberately, appreciating taste, texture, and aroma. Simple domestic tasks were approached with mindfulness. Daily routines were structured to encourage calm, deliberate engagement. Every action, whether social, intellectual, or physical, became an opportunity for cultivation of attention, patience, and presence. Leisure was therefore not a separate sphere, but an integrated principle guiding all facets of existence. Festivals, seasonal retreats, and social gatherings further reinforced these principles. Participation in communal events was measured, reflective, and attentive, blending aesthetic, social, and intellectual engagement. Sensory experiences, music, visual design, food, fragrance were appreciated deliberately. Observation, conversation, and reflection were interwoven with social interaction, highlighting the balance between communal engagement and personal cultivation that characterized 18th century leisure. Through repeated practice across contexts, the individual internalized patterns of attentive engagement, observation, reflection, measured pacing, and ethical awareness became habitual, shaping perception, thought, and behavior. The cultivation of presence, the appreciation of subtlety, and the integration of knowledge and reflection were continuous processes, reinforcing the art of living deliberately. In this framework, doing nothing outwardly was profoundly active. It nurtured awareness, insight, and composure, producing a life of depth, calm, and refinement. The synthesis of these practices demonstrates the holistic philosophy underpinning 18th century leisure, knowledge, aesthetic appreciation, ethical reflection, social grace, and attentiveness to natural and seasonal rhythms were intertwined. Each element reinforced the others, creating a comprehensive approach to living deliberately. The careful orchestration of time, space, activity, and reflection cultivated an integrated awareness, transforming ordinary life into a continuous practice of thoughtful presence and intentional experience. Ultimately, the art of leisure in the 18th century was a philosophy of attention. It trained the senses, disciplined the mind, refined social interaction, and harmonized engagement with the environment. Through reading, reflection, observation, artistic practice, social exchange, and quiet contemplation, individuals cultivated a life rhythm in which every action was meaningful, every perception attended, and every experience integrated into broader understanding. Leisure was not an escape from responsibility or engagement. It was the disciplined cultivation of presence, insight, and ethical, aesthetic, and intellectual growth. In conclusion, the 18th century approach to life demonstrates that the deliberate, unhurried, and mindful engagement with both the inner and outer world yields richness beyond simple productivity or amusement. Through a structured rhythm of observation, reflection, social grace, intellectual cultivation, and ethical contemplation, the individual achieved a harmonious life. Attentiveness, deliberate pacing, and integration of learning into daily practice formed the core of this philosophy, illustrating that doing nothing outwardly was, in truth, a profound and active cultivation of wisdom, composure, and the art of living fully. The legacy of this approach endures. Attentiveness, reflection, and deliberate engagement remain as timeless principles, demonstrating that the art of leisure is not mere indulgence, but a structured, mindful, and deeply enriching approach to life. By synthesizing sensory, intellectual, ethical, and social practices into a cohesive rhythm, the 18th century individual exemplified a model of existence in which calm, depth, and deliberate awareness define the measure of true leisure.